Well, Timothy, I'm so glad that your film is being shown at Out at the Movies for the Winston-Salem Film Festival, and I'm really grateful you made time to talk to us today about it. Thank you very much.
Hey, it's my pleasure, and thank you for putting the festival on despite a pandemic going on.
Right? Can you believe all the work they've put on to make this a virtual festival? You know, it's not easy even for the large festivals, but imagine these kinds of grassroots festivals, what hoops they have to jump through. So I'm with you. I applaud them for making sure this festival occurred this year, because it gave me a chance to see your film and talk about your film. So your documentary is called The Right Girls. And this is the kind of documentary that is very close to journalism in a way. Tell me about your background as a filmmaker, Timothy.
Yeah, so my background is I've been working on films of migration, both independent documentaries that I would say are journalistic, as well as for migration agencies and humanitarian nonprofits for the last 10 years or so. And this film came about when I heard about the caravan coming across Mexico in 2018 during the run-up to the midterms. There was a lot of false information out there about migrants and people tweeting all sorts of things. So I decided to go down and meet up with the caravan and just find some very personable stories to tell. And so that's what I did. I flew down to southern Mexico and found the caravan and found this group of transgender women who had come together to support each other as they were on the journey. And I was just like, they were amazing people and I was compelled by them. So I decided to follow them for what I thought would just be a day or two. And it turned into 6 weeks, and that's the film you see now.
So before we get too far into this film, tell me how you chose this as the kind of filmmaker you wanted to be. When you started out as a documentarian, how did you choose social justice issues and migrants and immigration?
You know, I grew up on a university campus that had...
Do you want to give your school a shout out?
Andrews University. It's in Michigan, and the campus has a large population that have come from all around the world to study there. And so I was just exposed to people that were migrating to the United States from early on. And so as I started my film career, I started to travel a lot. And the Haiti earthquake kind of like was my first real big project. I flew down there about 4 days after the earthquake hit, made a film on how CNN actually influenced the US State Department to evacuate about 138 orphans to the United States. And so that was my first film, and we distributed that through Hulu.com, and I decided that that was kind of the beat I wanted to follow, and so that's what I've been doing ever since.
So do you tend to work with NGOs? Do you work with governments? What is your process like as you're beginning to figure out what's going to be the next topic you cover?
I work a lot, commercially for NGOs and nonprofits. And then when it comes to these kinds of independent films, I find things that are news stories, but oftentimes news, journalists cover the facts and figures, but don't have the same time period as a film to follow up for months on end. So I'm always looking for kind of the intersection between those two ideas.
You said that when you get to cover this film, you were watching the news reports of the caravan as it was starting. This isn't a one-time thing. This is a more frequent event. Talk to me about how this particular topic spoke to you before you even got there.
I think that this caravan, one was it had just gotten a lot of media attention. The President Trump had been tweeting out about it a lot and saying things that were completely false about the migrants. And again, migrants, I believe, are just people that are looking for a better future, usually economic reasons, but also could be issues of violence or all sorts of different things. So that's kind of how I decided to dive into this one. And again, I was just going down for a couple of days to find a few personal stories and met these women and decided to just keep going.
So when you arrived, did you have it in mind to look for transgender characters, transgender subjects for your film?
Not at all. I was just going to find some people that I thought were interesting. And again, when I got there, the situation was everyone had been sleeping outside. They'd been defecating in the streets. They had have limited access to food and water, and so it was a very dire situation. And I heard some music playing, and it was these women, and were dancing around their cell phone and listening to music and just trying to make the most out of a little bit of joy in the afternoon, and it just really spoke to me. And so that's why I decided to ask them if I could follow them.
That is the kind of moment that would draw your attention, right? You're in those kinds of circumstances that seem very harsh, and to see these young women trying to buoy their spirits by dancing to music from their phone.
Yeah.
Take me to that moment where you approached them and you began asking them questions and deciding that you would try and follow them for your film.
So it was one of those things where I had to build a relationship. So I went up and I filmed them for a little bit and just did a little quick interview and just asked them who they were and where they were from and what they were hoping to accomplish by joining the caravan, and left it at that. And then a couple hours later came back and asked them if I could follow them just the next morning, just for a few hours. And they said, sure. And so I got up at, I think it was 3 or 4 a.m., whenever the caravan would walk in the mornings because it was cooler. And so met up with them then and started walking. And the next day went and found them again and kept walking, and just kept doing that until we had built a relationship, and they were willing to share their stories with me and trust me with those stories.
That's the key as a documentary filmmaker, to build rapport, trust, so that you have unique access to the stories you're trying to cover. What are the tips you might have for some of the younger filmmakers that are attending this virtual film festival about how to go about doing that? How do you develop that skill?
I think a lot of it is to just put the camera down sometimes and actually connect and let your intentions be known and get to know them and just build that rapport and connection before you start filming. I think that's a valuable skill.
That's interesting that your advice is to sometimes put the camera down at the very beginning, because the temptation is that you want to film everything in case they say something brilliant.
Correct. Yeah. I think the other thing that I believe in is to not hide behind your equipment. The film was made with a simple DSLR that we had gotten at Best Buy, and the really good microphones, but it was just all in a backpack and a couple of changes of clothes, and it just allows that connection to happen versus hiding behind the pomp and circumstance.
Not to get bogged down in the technical aspect of the filmmaking, but it's very important for young filmmakers to note that you used a DSLR that you could find virtually anywhere, but you made sure to note that you had good microphones. Talk to me about the importance of audio in film.
I mean, in a documentary especially, so much of the narrative is driven by audio, and not just collecting good audio from the interview subjects, but also the verite moments and background noise, because that's really going to set the ambiance more than the images. I always, before I focus, adjust my audio levels, and I think that's invaluable for making a good documentary.
And this whole film looked as if it was run and gun the whole time, or at least most of the time. With
the exception of 1 or 2 interviews, the whole thing was handheld. No tripods, nothing.
So were you alone?
I was for the entire journey up the coast of Mexico. I was. A friend helped me out a little bit in Tijuana and a little bit in Iowa when we shot those sections. But for the most part, it was just me. So talk to me about because clearly the women that you followed, these young women, felt that a lot of this was dangerous for them. So by extension, there must have been moments where you felt you might be in danger. Talk to me about that as a filmmaker. I think that as a filmmaker, as a journalist, that's one of those things that we have to be prepared for, and everyone has their different comfort levels. And I think for me, yeah, I was so invested in the story that I just wanted to continue on with it. So I tried to put my fears aside and keep going. I took precautions wherever possible, texting friends and family where I was, every at least once a day, but more like every couple of hours. So you take as many precautions as you can. I team up with other journalists to split rides and taxis and hotels and just worked it as best I could.
So one thing that journalists face, and I think it's true for documentary filmmakers, is when you're following these kinds of stories, sometimes the viewer after the fact has this emotional response where they want to intercede and help, but that's not really something that, as a journalist, and often not as a documentary filmmaker, that you really can do. Talk to me about that principle for you on this project.
I mean, yeah, I think the saying is do no harm. And so you want to, on this project, it was hard to watch these women on this journey because they were in a very difficult circumstances and you, as a human, do want to do your best, but you also, as a journalist, can't interfere. And so it's a tough line. It definitely is. And I thank them for trusting me with their story and being very understanding of that through the process.
Are there any moments along this journey in this particular project that stick out to you in terms of, having to resist that urge to intercede because of the circumstances that your subjects and even you are facing?
I think there was one moment where in Tijuana there were anti-immigrant protests, and the women ended up at these protests, and I had to resist the urge to want to film because me filming with my cameras would draw attention to their presence there, and they are a vulnerable group, and so I had to just stand back and keep my distance from them, despite the urge that this is a very intense moment.
Tell me a little bit about your experience with interacting with and telling stories of trans people before you began this film, if you had any.
I had little to none. So this was my first time telling a story about trans women, and so it was definitely a learning process. And I definitely, when you take on a story like that, I think that one of the biggest things is to listen, and verite filmmaking really lends itself to that, where you are saying, hey, here's some basic questions, and please, let them have the stage and to use nice long cuts and everything so that they can express themselves freely. And I would use very simple questions, and after a while they would just answer whatever they were interested in, and they kind of narrated the film themselves. So that was kind of my approach to that.
What are some of the takeaways? Since you said you had limited knowledge and experience with transgender people and transgender women in particular, what are some of the takeaways you had even before you began the editing process?
I think that one of the takeaways that I had was that this is a very large community of people that in South America identify as transgender and who need to seek asylum and have been joining these caravans. I would never have guessed. So that one caravan of 7,000, I think there were between 44 and 50 women, and I think that was all new to me.
Really? Well, as you followed them along this journey, it was impromptu for you. You said you only imagined you'd be there for a day or two.
Yeah.
How did you sustain yourself with so little planning?
So luckily it was a slow season for me with work. It was the run up to Christmas, which everything else is starting to shut down there. So luckily I was able to take the time off of off of what I do for a living, and then Mexico is fairly affordable to go across, so it all kind of worked out in that regard. But I definitely had to buy new clothes when I got to Mexico City.
So we can't let that opportunity to go to without asking you, what is it that you do for a living that allows you to be a filmmaker? Because I really think that the glamour of film festivals for many attendees sort of covers up the idea that filmmakers often are struggling out of passion to do these projects and not for financial gain as much as they might have thought.
Yeah,
so what is it that
not.
you do? What is it that you do?
So I have a production company, and we focus on putting together films for the NGOs around humanitarian issues and issues of migration. So we've worked for a lot of the large nonprofits doing similar kinds of work like this, but also like technical and training videos along the same kinds of principles.
So when you got there, you didn't intend to just follow one group of people. You didn't intend to follow this group of transgender women. Tell me about when you decided along that route that they were going to be your sole focus, because we don't see you branch off in following other groups of people.
Yeah, it was actually pretty early on. It was probably within the first 2 or 3 days that I decided to just focus on them. Once that we had built that rapport. I think the build up to that rapport is always the time when I'm also looking around and seeing who else I might be interested in documenting. But once that rapport was built, I was pretty dead set on following them. And there were, one of the hardest things always is when it comes to the editing process is throwing away good material. Because it doesn't fit in with the story. And this film definitely has those kinds of moments.
Well, before I ask you if you can share one of those moments, can you tell me, was there an incident or a moment or an exchange in those early days that helped you decide, okay, yes, these are my subjects. These are the women I'm going to follow for the entire film? Was there something that occurred?
One of the main interviews with Valentina, it was, if you've seen the film, she's sitting on the porch. She's sitting on the porch there in front of somebody's house who had welcomed them to sleep there for the night. And she just was so open and honest. And that was the second day that I had met them. It was probably in those couple of hours that I decided that this was the group that I wanted to follow.
So, of course, I'm going to follow up and say, what sort of moments did you have to leave out that really stand out to you that you wish you could have included, even though they didn't fit into this particular narrative? Because, a documentary does have to have a definite running time.
Yeah, I think one of them for me was there was so they had they were camping. The caravan was camping outside of a little town, and the women had gone into town to do some errands and grab money from a bank and all this. And during that process, there was a Day of the Dead parade or a Halloween parade. I forget which that they ended up to, and they just had such a great time, and it was such a great scene. But unfortunately, it didn't fit into the narrative of the film and didn't move the story forward. So we ended up having to lose it, even though it's such an incredible moment.
It'll be out on the Blu-ray or the DVD edition later.
Something like that. Maybe on our website. So.
On your website. When you were editing this piece, how did you know when you found the through line? Because as you just alluded to, there has to be a particular narrative because it's a film after all. So we need a beginning, a middle, and end. We need characters that we can root for. We need people that perhaps are a little bit of the antagonist. So how did you develop that structure after spending all this time with these people?
I think so the production was primarily, like I said, myself in Mexico with the women, but when it came to the editing, that's really where I had a really strong team that came into play. One of my close friends
today, but we certainly have heard about them. So please, I'm sad we don't get to meet them, but go on.
So Patrick Wright, one of our the people that got the editing process started with me, he kind of identified some of the scenes and helped me work on the structure. and then one of our producers, Siobhan, kind of came in and kept the process moving, and then the writer kind of came in and finessed it. And like having those different iterations where, so I did the editing, like the button pushing, but like having different people come in and take a look at each of these things. And we would have it translated and then look at it again. And then Jessie, the woman who translated it all, would take another look at it. And it was just like this collaborative process through these different stages. But it definitely took several months of doing that back and forth to get to the film you have today.
Was there a language barrier while you were following them along?
There was. I used translators and a lot of Google Translate on my phone. And then when we got back, we got SRT files made of what they were saying so that we could edit it. And then Jessica Reeves went through and translated the whole film after the fact.
I think that's awfully brave to trust an app so much when you're so far away from home and all alone.
I mean, you'll figure it out, right?
Did you feel a need to consult any transgender editors or story consultants as you were putting the film together?
So what we did is we reached out to several transgender advocates in like Los Angeles was one, and then some at the University of Maryland, and we asked them to watch the different cuts of the films and add their comments and critiques. And several of the members of the team identify as LGBT or LGB, but we used like a team of consultants for the transgender parts.
Why did you feel that was important on this particular project? I mean, clearly it's about transgender women. It's following these transgender women. But why did you feel a need to consult local or domestic advocates so that you could get some feedback on your film?
I think that that's always important is to make sure that you understand things and that you're answering the right questions and that people are being represented accurately. So I think that that's important for any topic that you're producing a film on.
I asked that in particular because, as we talked about before, there are a lot of younger filmmakers who will be attending the film festival, watching these interviews after they've seen your film. And I think that's instructive to hear from a successful filmmaker that they still feel that's important. It's not just their vision. So what are the most valuable lessons you got out of that process on this project?
It's interesting that you say that it's not just their vision. I think that that's the beauty of a documentary, is the fact that you can bring in multiple people's stories and takes. And like a good documentary, you don't know what the end is going to be. You just believe that there will be an ending, and so you follow it. And I think that by bringing people in to collaborate like that is the takeaway that I hope people will gather on, because without a strong team, it would never have happened.
Now, most of the people who watch our conversation will have just watched your film streaming, but some may watch this before they see the film. So we're not going to give away too much. But we do see you follow them after the caravan is over. That must have been also a very different sort of problem, a different challenge for you. Can you talk to me a little bit about that without giving away the outcome for each of these women?
I think that the challenge to a story like this is that the struggle just doesn't end when the film ends, that it continues on and still is continuing. And so from a filmmaker's perspective, you got to know sometimes when to stop, and just from the human level of the story's continuing, and I keep in touch and follow up, and I think that that's part of the struggle.
You still keep in touch and follow up with them now?
You betcha, I do.
Wow.
Maybe like once a month or so, I'll check in. Sometimes more often, sometimes less, but I do keep in touch.
Have they seen your finished film?
They have.
And what was that like for you to share this with them?
It I was obviously nervous, but I'm glad that they got the opportunity to see it, and that they gave their blessing on it, and that it's out there. Johanna in the film, she has been a very strong advocate for it, and Valentina and the others. So it was a very rewarding experience.
So Timothy, this is not the first screening your film has had. It's had quite a few. And so you've had to do a lot of these kinds of interviews. Often they're very truncated in terms of time, but we're a little different because it's digital and we're doing it ahead of time. So I can give you the luxury of talking about whatever it is you hope you get to talk about in these interviews that doesn't always come up. There has to be something either about this film in particular or you as a filmmaker that you would like to share that often the interviewer either doesn't think to ask you or doesn't have time to ask you. What is it you want to say?
I think that the thing that I always want to iterate is that stories like this are just important to be told, and that I'm grateful that these women trusted me with their stories and allowed me to do that. I think so. I understand a lot of your audience are students, and I think speaking to them, if you decide to become a filmmaker, and more specifically a documentary filmmaker, be prepared for it to be kind of a difficult journey at times, but a very rewarding one, because of the types of people you get to meet. So oftentimes, a documentary like this is very similar to what the news would be doing, telling stories of information, but you get to, or I got to dig in and meet these people on a human level. And I hope that that's what people gain from this documentary, is the fact that you get to meet these women and see their humanity and their hopes and dreams and the things they struggle with. And I think that's the most rewarding part about being a documentary filmmaker. And you only get those moments a few times in a career. And so to just learn to cherish them when they do come along.
Yeah, that's good advice no matter what it is you do. But I think in telling these kinds of stories, it can often be a reminder that we need to have brought forward more often, because it's the churn of getting the story out and doing the mechanics that we can forget what a great privilege it is to do this kind of work. Since you say you're still in touch with the women that you followed, I don't think it would be inappropriate for me to ask you to extend my thanks and thanks from the Out at the Movies Film Festival and the audiences for allowing us to see their story, being brave enough, having the audacity to be seen in this way, because it's truly very informative and in some ways very inspiring and very encouraging. I hope that you'll pass that on to them for us.
For sure.
So we'll go ahead and end our interview here, because I know they're going to want to look up the rest of the projects that you do. How else can viewers find the work that you're doing, Timothy?
So for this specific film, it is currently, if you missed it during the festival, it is currently streaming on Amazon, iTunes, and Google Play. And then if you want to check out my other work, you can go to my website, wolferproductions.com.
WOLFER.com?
Wolferproductions.com, correct.
Great. You had your finger up like you had one more thought.
I thought you cut the interview, so I was like, I was going to ask you if we could plug it. Could we do that section again? Sorry. Yeah.
No, we'll just let that go.
Okay.
Because that's real, right?
Fair enough.
That's
No
our
problem.
verity moment.
Yeah.